My some of my experience as far as educational psychology, this semester I taught a learning strategies course called Individual Learning Skills to undergrads at the University of Texas. So I was introduced and kind of trained to talk about and to teach some of the educational psychology that goes into motivation theory, goes into learning theory and stuff like that. And I pulled from my course some of the really important, really instantly usable tidbits. And they're as follows. We're talking about attitudes versus motivation, how belief structures work, self-efficacy, and attributions. So there's a lot more, and the theory can be a lot more involved, but it's not necessary to get into all that. But sort of a cursory tour through it's very helpful. So I'll try to be quick so it's not too boring. But an important thing when we're thinking about the students we're working with is that there's a big difference between attitude and actual motivation. And, you know, in my experiences, I've had a lot of circumstances where the initial attitude towards school or towards academics or towards any kind of trajectory is a little soured or a little bit rough, to say the least. Jack was talking about the value in reading, and we'll talk about how belief systems can help with that in a little bit. But the idea of attitude towards something, it's one of the biggest roadblocks we have when we're trying to help our kids. So how attitude and learning works, defined, it's how our feelings, beliefs, and values about learning impact that learning. You know, and towards learning we felt angry, frustrated, bored, annoyed, excited. Any range of emotion we'll end up feeling towards learning, and it really has to do with what our experiences are. And a lot of the kids, all the kids we work with, have had a lot of turbulence with how they've experienced their learning environment and their learning experiences. So it's almost guaranteed that the children we're working with of any age is going to have a lot of negative attitude built up, and you know, in regard to learning. So, and that's actually normal for any kind of learner. It's even normal for grad students like me. You know, the education is this complicated process of the academic environment and the skill, will, and self-regulation that we use in navigating that environment. And it's no different for our kids. But it's definitely important to recognize that motivation versus attitude is distinctly different, because where attitude is the mindset and general outlook we have, you know, this sort of broad focus on content, what we think about college, what we think about for the grade school, we think about reading. You know, what the attitude is only one component. Because motivation is actually the willingness, or the diligence, or the self-discipline to push through regardless of attitude. Now, obviously, it's best to have good attitude, good motivation, but when we're working with kids of any age, we can recognize that even if their attitude is sour, we can aim at finding ways to increase or uplift their motivation. And we'll talk about how to do that, and there's several different ways, but attitude is something that can kind of lift and improve once motivation happens. I mean, in spite of the obstacles of education or the negative feelings they might have about it, you can motivate your child, student, to push against it. And sometimes you can actually incorporate that in the narrative. I'll talk about that in a minute. Because the motivation is more specific, more focused, and this is, you know, why we do the things we do, or why the student will do the things they do to find success in school, and ultimately find success in, you know, their own life trajectory. So beliefs is the first thing to talk about with that, and what we want to kind of pay attention to is a belief itself is neutral. So whatever belief a student has about school or about an academic discipline or anything like that is by itself a neutral thing. If, for example, and I feel this, if I believe that I'm terrible at math, that's not necessarily negative, depending on what I do with it. If I say I'm terrible at math, or actually the example I have first, if I think I'm a good science student, that sounds positive. It's mostly neutral. Because what's necessary is this. If knowing I'm a good science student makes me, you know to study and work effectively, that's positive. But if I think that I'm so good that I don't need to study, then that's self-sabotaging. The opposite is true, is if they think they're poor at something, like this, we can use that belief to sort of encourage them to do better. So it's the idea that if you believe something negative about any state, school's not worth anything, it doesn't matter anyway, I don't like school, instead of letting those things kind of shut down the feelings towards education or the progress to do better, we can attack the beliefs or approach the beliefs in a way where we're trying to make it positive, make it enabling. So if your child, for example, thinks school's no good, I don't like it anyway, I don't care about it, you try to think of, if that's what you believe, what are ways to enable that to make it more positive? How can you make it more fun? How can you make it more interesting, more compelling? So that causal thing where they're like, I don't like school, it's not good for me, so I'm not going to try, that's self-sabotaging. But I don't like school, it's no good for me, so I need to find ways to fix that, or I need to find out how it can help me, or I need to find out why it's good. And this gives us an opportunity as tutors to point out some of the benefits and talk about how it's okay to feel this negative attitude, this negative belief, but we have a control, both as the student and as, especially the younger kids, as the tutor, to sort of reframe negative beliefs into something more enabling. Because with all beliefs, there's sort of this inner voice component. And this is true of children of any age, that there's always an inner dialogue going on about school, about success, about the future, and a lot of that becomes this negative self-talk, and that sort of propagates and perpetuates negative reinforcing behaviors. And so to break that is to find a way to turn that positive, and so that keeping in mind ideas, recognizing that what our students feeling about reading, or our students feeling about math, or even going to school, especially when it's juxtaposed with a lot of other obstacles that are really big, it's hard to find positives with that. It's hard to make that inner voice reflect on things more positive. But we can do it if we're sensitive to what that struggle is, and if we find ways to make it realistically enabling. And a lot of the things that actually work for that is the idea that with things so difficult, school is an outlet. School is a safe haven. School is a place where you can take control. And actually, I'll talk about that in just a second, too. The second point that just popped up is self-efficacy. And it was Alicia that talked about that, but the idea of like bolstering efficacy for the student, it's a huge thing. When you recognize that a lot of, especially older students, are pretty disconnected and pretty self-defeating when it comes to school, it's the biggest challenge, is how do you tutor someone who doesn't think they have a chance to, or doesn't believe they can do it? And so knowing that their beliefs are negative and finding ways to bolster that is one component, but self-efficacy itself is something we can target and address. Define an important category of enabling and self-sabotaging beliefs. It refers to how efficacious we think we are in a specific situation. So this is essentially confidence and self-esteem. And the more you can bolster self-efficacy and give a student a sense of control over it, or a sense of confidence, the more likely they are to continue behaviors that do it. So it's sort of this loop that we can try to introduce into the student's life by any means necessary. Anything that gives a good feeling is going to instill a little more confidence, which is going to increase the self-efficacy, which will allow them to feel more confident for better goals. So, and comparing how these things work, high self-efficacy is very strong. So usually when we're introduced with a student, their efficacy for education is damaged by that turbulence and by so many other things going on. And by the time we have a chance to really talk about these things, they've already kind of established pretty firm beliefs about how they do in school, how they do it with math. And so it becomes a challenge for us to take that negative place and sort of start an upward spiral. And this can be done in a myriad of ways. There are small games we can do with kind of playful activities. You can do, lots of praise for whatever math is done, whatever kind of assignment. At any moment, you just want to bolster the self-esteem and self-efficacy in any way, because it will lead to bigger challenges. They'll take bigger risks. So the third thing I want to talk about, and it's very strange to talk to a computer where I can't see anybody, so I hope everyone's still there, but is the idea of attribution beliefs. And it's what we're talking about is the reasons that people have for why you're successful or not successful. And it's on basically, for our purposes, a 2x2 matrix. And I'll show you that in a second. But it's basically how we finish these sentences. You know, I did well on that test because of this. I did not do well because of that. And what we find is internal versus external, controllable versus uncontrollable is something to really pay attention to. And this is how these things all play out. And what's most important is internal controllable. This is something you want to focus on with your student, because this is where we can help reinforce the notion that you can take control of your own life. You can take control of your own success. What you can, you have control of what's within you, and what you can, your environment. These are the things that are necessary. You can't change the study environment. You can't change the turbulence. You can't change teachers or the nature of the task and things like that. Luck is something that's completely out of our realm. We don't want to focus on that at all. And we don't want to think that innate ability is something. We want internal and controllable, because that's where the student can get their hands on their own education. This is where motivation becomes very important, because it becomes something you use as a tool. So this is something we want to focus on when we're thinking of from our students. So all this is fine just talking about it in a general sense. But what I want the discussion to be when we kind of open it up is, how does this kind of stuff apply to my student? How does this, when I'm sitting there with a student with his arms crossed and grumpy face who just wants to go ahead and go back to the TV, how do I turn this around? How do I make it fun? How do I make it engaging? How do I show them that this motivation is such a big deal? And I'm used to working with older kids. And there's a distinct thing that worked for me, and in the discussion I can talk about a lot more freely. But first we'll talk about younger youth as well. At that age, it's so important to build self-esteem through small successes. You want to give them as much efficacy as possible. You want, if it's bad, if it's poor, if it's strained, find any way necessary to bring it up. Any assignment done should get just a boolean praise. You should have rewards. You can make it fun. You can make games. It doesn't matter so much how on task it is necessarily. It doesn't even matter if it's particularly challenging at first. I mean, you can kind of get a feel for what baseline point is like safely successful and work there. When they're, if you can make reading fun, even just by reading to the student, if they're young enough that they'll just enjoy your reading to them, that's a great way to make the connection fun, make the associations good. And then whereas this might actually seem a little obvious, at first flush, which it becomes very meaningful when you just think about how you can apply it to your particular situation. Anything that brings a smile, anything that makes it fun. And I've actually had circumstances where the homework that's due the next day is put aside because it's causing a lot of negative, frustrating experiences, and something purely fun or something almost irrelevant but positive is done instead, and just sort of tethered to that homework. Just something positive to kind of slowly uplift or slowly reframe the perception of what these tasks are. But the younger the kid, the more eager they'll be to engage in things that seem fun, and drawing and crayons and things like that. But it's that constantly positive associations, constantly making it positive and constantly tying it into their own controllable internal things, that it's coming from them and they have power to change it. Eventually this sort of expands on to the idea of you can take care of your own narrative. Connecting your student to his or her own narrative is one of the most important things I can think to do as far as establishing motivation, because every student, everybody, but especially every student we work with has a story, and it has a powerful story. We don't need to know the details. We don't need to know the nitty-gritty. We don't need to know a lick of it. But we can understand and respect that that narrative is there. And through education and through goal setting and through what we're trying to do as tutors and students, like what the whole process is the exact act of taking that narrative and exacting control over it and making that an internal controllable process. And so almost as a theme for any interaction I've ever had with any student I've worked with is the idea of, hey, you have this narrative and you have this opportunity to become an author in it. And so you focus on those things that you be controlled, and you set goals that promote that success, even the small ones. It's just like the smaller kids and later adults, and this stuff works for me. I use it all the time. anything that will promote a success that can kind of like scaffold to the next success, I mean, as many of those as possible will be helpful. You know, building self-esteem through these small successes slowly starts to kind of undo a lot of that deleterious negative attitudes and associations that have been built up over time, and deservedly built up. I mean, there's resource deprivation, there are situations out of the control that, you know, turn things upside down. There's not the same resource structures and encouraging structures that are necessary. I mean, there are a lot of things not in place that needed to be. And so to build those retrofit them isn't impossible, but it's definitely a process. And so that's actually kind of one of the things I think is very important, and one of the things I talked about a lot when I was working as a volunteer tutor coordinator, is that our role is a supportive one. And, you know, building a connection with our students by any means possible is one of the most important things to do, because before we can really set forth any kind of success in doing those math problems that are due the next day, or reading that book that's due for the book report, or anything academic, we want to make sure that there's a sense of trust, there's a sense of connection and honesty, and so we're not just another means of making them feel bad or inadequate or uncomfortable with their education. We're just a means of making it seem worthwhile. I use my drumming, the fact I used to work at Paramount Pictures. I use a lot of comedy. I don't know how well it can transfer over a webinar, but I'm a very animated guy, and I like to be goofy, and I like to make jokes, and it's that kind of humor that actually would first start to kind of loosen the conversation up. And I would worry about that and sort of establishing kind of a positive regard that they would know no matter what they would say, I would be okay and I support them. That kind of stuff was always a primary foundation for me, because I recognized that once that was established, I can talk about goal setting. I can talk about, okay, this is hard, here's what we can do to make it better. Okay, maybe your reading level is something that frustrates you, here's how you can make it better. And it requires a tremendous amount of patience, because it doesn't go smoothly all the time. And some, you know, if you're not particularly funny, and I don't know if I'm actually particularly funny, but whatever strengths you have, you want to play to them, whatever that works. And it could be just kind, benevolent support. It can be interesting, flashy games. It could be anything that works. And you want to kind of tailor that relationship uniquely, but you want to recognize that that connection is one of the first ways to really get anything going. Because when we're talking about beliefs, and we're talking about self-efficacy, and we're talking about attributions, we're talking about, you know, how these things are judged, engaged, and experienced by the youth. It's a pretty personal process, and we can always stay away from the personal stories and the accounts and all the stuff that happened before. Again, just respecting that it's there, and, you know, we can get to a place where we can be open to talk about these things. And another thing is very important when you're working with any student, not to take it personally. It would be so much better, so much more fun if the beauty of education and the ability to motivate and all the things that we know education can do, all the reasons that we decided to be tutors, if that could be instantly and readily understood, it would be a magical process. And that process is there, and that warm, fuzzy feeling of like moving towards that success is absolutely attainable for, I think, any student. But it takes a while to get to that level, and it takes a while, and you have to start putting in place some successes. You know, and that's sometimes offset by a lot of frustrating, you know, bad report cards and being behind a grade in school. Like, a lot of things are actually working against that. And that's why the talk of a narrative is important, because when you're setting up successes against, you know, these failures or these frustrations or these roadblocks, that's part of the narrative. That struggle, that overcoming becomes something where they can feel a power over time. So this is sort of a crash course through some of these concepts that are basically talking about and circling on the idea that motivation is a process of how we interpret our environment and what we're going to do to change it. And so when we're working with trying to motivate our students and empower them, it's a slow process of building their self-efficacy, making them aware of what their beliefs are, and sort of making focusing on making attributions that give them as much responsibility as possible. And so that's just me talking to my own computer screen. I would love to hear questions or speak about things, hear stories. I'll talk about one story just to kind of give you an idea of what this meant for me before, I had a lens of educational psychology. And that story is when I first got a taste of working with students, and it was a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old brother duo, I was very moved by the process, and I felt a lot of great things. I mean, that surge of pride and anxiety you get when you're first a tutor for School on Wheels. And once I started getting my footing with it, and Justin and I were doing really well, I wanted to move to something that was more front line. I want to work with older students. I want to really kind of get to where education, not just like sort of the social building, and not just like and sure the two students I had were very precocious, very bright, and doing really well. So it was a very easy process. I wanted something that was well, challenging, more challenging. Don't get me wrong. It was definitely challenging. So Natasha set me up to work with Beechwood, and Beechwood is a group home for teens. And when I first got there, it was a loud, raucous, turbulent, high-energy environment, and personalities were bouncing off the walls. And I instantly fell in love with the place, but I also recognized that there's a lot of things going on, and it moved really quickly. My first true tutoring experience happened right away, and it was with a student. Her name is Mercy. She did not want to meet with me. And there was a yelling match where she was going to meet with that tutor, or else this privilege was going to be revoked. And they threw us both in a room, and I found myself sitting on the other side of a table with a frowning, dark-mooded, grumpy, arms crossed, looking away. I mean, just every sign to say that she didn't want to be there. And I pretty much recognized right away we wouldn't be working on her algebra assignment. When I was talking with her, just to get to know her a little bit, it was really kind of awkward. It was really kind of rough. She looked at me and she said, "I hate school." And I said, "That's fine. I don't really care about school." She says, "Of course you do. You're a tutor." I was like, No. I care about ninja training you. Think of this as ninja training. And I meant it kind of as a joke, and she laughed. But I recognized that the idea of calling it ninja training is something that connected to her. So I basically said, it's like school and grades is one thing, but in the grand scheme of ninja training, you got to know some of this stuff. So before we're going to do nunchucks and those splits and all those weird things that ninjas do, you got to do a little math, And it was enough to make her laugh, and it was enough to kind of keep it going. So every time she was frustrated or uncomfortable with the academic institution or all those negative beliefs she had for school, I'd reframe it as ninja training, and I would use words out of context. I would use things like nunchucks and ninja stars and stuff like that as a metaphor for the same things that we're talking about if we're talking about school directly. And it was enough for her, and it was it was funny enough and goofy enough, and I'm nothing like a ninja, not even a little bit, so it's just funny to hear me say it. It was enough to get some kind of traction, and actually to this day she calls me ninja. But this was an experience that I had where I realized that reframing it and changing the belief system a little bit, or kind of changing what we were talking about so we weren't under the burden of all that negative stuff, had an instantly positive effect. And so it's just one story kind of clumsily put out there, but I ended up being at Beechwood and the other group homes that LAYN represents 4 or 5 days a week, and mostly because I just enjoyed the process. I enjoyed hanging out, and I started to see over time a momentum build up. And so the students I was working with actually started at first just feeling generally better, and then feeling a little more efficacious, and then actually getting kind of goal set and traction going. And then that's when the real fight began. That's when all of the things that we struggle against were really truly fought. And what was beautiful about it is it was truly fought. It was that the understanding of being able to attack these struggles, to overcome that book report that they were so afraid of, or to make up the grade that is necessary to not go a year behind, or to go that extra year. I mean, there's whatever it is understanding that the narrative that they have, the story that they have a power to change it and control it. And that was constantly reinforced, and it needed constant reinforcement, but increasingly a momentum was built. So And so that's sort of the crux of what I think is important as far as empowering or motivating, is recognizing that it's a slow, ongoing process that really needs to center on a lot of like just positive reinforcement and positive sort of energy. So at this point, I feel like I should stop talking, and I'd love to hear from anyone else. And if there's any specific questions, I'd love to address it. Or if there's any stories that someone else has, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I just want to add that Jason hasn't been at that location for, how has it been, like a year and a half or 2 years?
It's been almost a year and a half.
Yeah. Year and a half. But these students, whenever I come across them, they can't stop talking about him. So Jason is the one to ask to get some insight on working with your students. So let's open it up to questions. I would prefer, I see a hand going up already, so I would prefer the hand raising if we can. It's kind of hard to manage the written questions. So I see Alicia has her hand up, so I'm going to open up her microphone. Can you hear me?
Can I hear you? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess can I hear you is the question. But what question did you have for Jason, or what did you want to tell a story or anything?
Well, Jason, first of all, I want to thank you for your time here. Although I think you speak a little fast, I myself have some learning disabilities. I think I was able to grasp a lot of that. And I'm just so stoked that you're talking about self-efficacy, because this has been, this was my capstone while I was at Cal State Channel Islands. And how do you think, you said you worked usually with the older kids, which is a challenge. But how would you suggest to begin to frame the children? Like, let's say, you said you initially were working with a 4- and 7-year-old, if I'm not mistaken. Let's say they came to you with that cross-armed attitude that Marcy did. What are some sentences that you would say about school? I know that there needs to be a connection. I totally get that. But I think maybe a loss of words. You know, can you think of something? Well,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I'm sorry for talking fast. When I'm nervous, I talk fast. So
You're fine.
So, but yeah, when it's actually, I always feel more comfortable talking and working with older students, because you can have a dialogue. Even if it's an argument, you can have a dialogue about why the arms are crossed. But when there's a younger student with the arms crossed, the language is a lot harder to use, and how to make it happen. And what I've done, or what seems to work with me, is sort of a bait and switch, where anecdotally, there's an example. One of the young kid I was working with really didn't like any reading whatsoever. And as soon as he had any kind of reading or any kind of writing, because he felt he was so slow at it, he'd get really grumpy. He'd cross his arms, he'd throw his pens, he would throw tantrums. He just resisted it in every possible way. And so I did a bait and switch. Is instead of grinding on that too much, I'd start drawing. And I know I can draw a little bit, but not. I can draw enough that it would impress a 4-year-old. And so there was this game where I would just ask them to have me draw anything they wanted. What can you think of? And so that was something he was interested in. And from there, I would often go to, wow, wouldn't this be cool if it also had a story? Wouldn't writing a story be good? And it was just this gratuitous desire to have that negative feeling kind of get forgotten and have fun sort of happen, and sort of reassess the baseline of it. Because I would talk and say, this is something you're good at, this is something you can do, it's not bad to be a little slower, I don't think you're slow at all, you know, even if you think you're slow, I haven't seen writing this good. And I would just constant praise, and would unfailingly make sure that he got a sense of good from the experience, even if he was frustrated. And it took a little while, and sometimes we would just draw, or sometimes he wouldn't have it. But increasingly, he would either be quicker to do it, or occasionally he wouldn't have such a problem with it. And I don't want to simplify it. I mean, it never went away in this 8 months to a year I was working with him. It didn't get to a point where it was forgotten, but he made traction on it, and he kept at it, and he kept working.
Jason?
Yeah, hello?
Yes, question. how do you think us as tutors can be involved with the student's school in order to give them some insight? Like, did you ever engage, you said that was a 4-year-old. Let's say it was a 3rd grader, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll go with, I'm sorry, I don't see the names, but there was a gentleman that was on here with a 3rd grader repeated first. Okay, there's a lot of people. Okay, that's a very important time for a child in 3rd grade. And we have a child that's already repeated first. How much what do you think as a tutor position, as a tutor coordinator, how can we help the school? Because I've seen where the school is kind of tearing them down, but the tutor can build them up, but they're kind of working against each other. You know, so
Yeah.
how, to not make us afraid to connect with the school, or just give me some insight on that. Did you ever connect with schools and tell how it helped?
Yeah, I can speak most personally about older kids, and I'll start with that, and I'll move back to younger. With any is these kind of issues, and that again, those kind of negative kind of feelings about being held back and stuff. You can incorporate the idea that this is something that's in the environment that you can work with and work to overcome, even in spite of. And so it's something you would say is like, okay, well, this is a circumstance that happened. This is something you're dealing with. You can either let that be this terrible thing, or you can take it by the horns and make it something more. And that's easy to communicate to a teenager. You can kind of tap into that teenage angst and have them recognize that they have power to fight back, so to speak. And so you set that sort of like idea of approaching it, but you also, yeah, as a positive thing. You can affect that, but what's really important is that you can affect that by talking with your teachers. You can affect that by going to any kind of tutoring thing. You can affect that by showing them that you can do it. You know, you can, and however much you can tether to positive goals that can come from it. So even as young as the 3rd grade and some of the awkwardness of maybe being older and bigger than the other students, I'm trying to speak delicately because I don't want to presume that I would be able to, I never worked with a 3rd grader particularly, but the idea of what they can do to make the situation work, or what they can do to make sure the situation doesn't stop there. And what I mean by that is I've always encouraged to get involved with the schools to the degree that if it's working against them, they're not doing it maliciously. So the more you can let the school, the teacher, the environment, that know where they have sharp edges and sort of like kind of work to make those less, maybe get more of a positive thing. If you can work in conjunction with the school, that's great. That's usually not very likely, so it's sort of inoculating or sort of like basically defending the student from those things by explaining them out. This is okay. This is not your fault. This is something that you can easily overcome, and in the grand scheme of things, this is no big deal. In fact, here are where there could be some advantages, or with all these other things you can do so amazingly. You're awesome. I mean, first and foremost, student, you're awesome. And so if there's anything that's telling you that you're not, here's where that's wrong. Here's where you are awesome. And there's no shortage of ways to kind of say that they're awesome. That's where the efficacy, self-esteem thing comes into play really big.
Yes, I've empowered students to not. A lot of them they don't want to ask questions. Like, they're so embarrassed to ask questions. And I said, there's, yes, you raise your hand and the teacher comes and everybody sees you raise your hand. But there's also those moments that you can take where you can walk up to the teacher, whether it's when you're headed out to recess or whatnot, and let them know. And that's really been helpful for those students.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the help-seeking stuff is huge because you get over the stigma of thinking that you're not smart because you had to ask. The quicker you can shed that.
I love that. Wait. Get over the stigma that you're not smart because you had to ask. That is so awesome. Okay.
And I think we've all had experiences with that. We've all been in an environment where we didn't want to ask because we didn't want to be the one who didn't know what's going on. And that's groupthink. There are so many social psychology experiments demonstrating that if you had the question, chances are, you're not alone.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alicia. Does anyone else have questions right now? Don't see any hands up. Or maybe just want to talk about a specific situation? Oh, I see Jack has his hand up. Hi, Jack.
Yeah, I gotta see if I got this mic going here. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm having a little bit of difficulty just kind of with I don't know, just sort of relating to the things that are available to the kids these days. It was sort of funny because I was willing to take any student, any age, and I didn't really know what I was getting into. So when my coordinator asked if I'd take this 9.5-year-old, I said sure, but I really didn't know what I was getting into. And so I started thinking about where was I at 9.5 and all this, and I couldn't even remember what was going on with me at 9.5. And when I look back at that, there was obviously, there weren't video games and things back then, and my student will get very easily distracted by things. We meet in a library, and he'll focus on some superhero comic or book or something like that, and point it out to me and ask if I know what it is or something like that, and of course I won't. I just don't relate to it at all. But I'll try to be interested in it and all that, and then I'll try to get us back on track. But and I'm realizing that the kids today don't really have to use their imaginations like we did, and I'm just wondering if there's some other way, so I guess that's what I'm struggling with a little bit, with the reading, because I remember when I was starting to read, I would get in and I would read a book, and there would be a few illustrations maybe, and then I would use that as sort of a seed, if you will, and then I would read the words in the rest of the book and have to think about what was going on, and build the story in my mind and those scenes in my mind based on what I'd seen before in an illustration or another book. And now it seems like it's all sort of given to them, and I'm trying to figure out how I can sort of start that. So what I was thinking is maybe I'm going to have to read to him and do it sort of dramatically, if you will, talk, even if I have to explain the words and the sentences and phrases, what they mean to me. And I'm already doing that a little bit. I don't know, I'd like to hear a little feedback on that.
Oh, absolutely. And reading is a particularly delicate and particularly important component for the education of all the kids. Language acquisition is something that poor environments, turbulent environments, when there's an at-risk environment, reading comprehension and language acquisition suffers the most. And so what ends up happening is if you don't have the proper language acquisition in the first grade, second grade is exponentially more difficult, third, fourth on, and so it's real easy for a student to disconnect from reading and hate it and feel uncomfortable because they feel they're not on target enough. And so sometimes it's not, and also there's English as a second language as a big factor for a lot of the students as well, depending on what area you're working in. So there are a lot of things that definitely play into reading being a challenge and reading being something that's not loved in the way that a lot of us have a connection to. And so there are many ways to do that. And it's funny you mentioned comic books. I've relied on comic books as a starting point, because the thing about reading and language acquisition is it's a practiced process, and even if it's behind or it's not as developed, whatever start point is fun or engaging and simple is a good place to begin. And so I use comic books and as that, because the text is more simple. It's got that graphic element, but it's still reading. And so some of the things that, listening to your scenario, there are two things that popped up to me that would probably work really well concurrently. The first of which is, if he's got comic book characters he's interested in, have him teach you about them. Beyond just being, interested, like, have him discuss it, talk about the powers, have him be the tutor and demonstrate, this control, because it would be fun for him to be able to be the authority on something. And so it's a good way to connect, and it's also, here's this thing that has to do with reading, even if it's in the little thought bubbles above all the pictures, and that's a good start. And you basically say, hey, comic books are reading. You don't like reading, but you like comic book characters. This is awesome. Another thing, you said it, I think it's a brilliant idea, is definitely reading. If you can find really interesting, really good things and read to him, and he's getting this cool story that is coming out of a book, that's your opportunity to say, this is what reading affords. And because reading, if you're not at grade level for reading, if it's above your range, your zone of development, it's a frustrating, uncomfortable process. You're not getting the story when you're stumbling over the words. But if you can, you hold up this dusty old archaic thing called a book, and you start telling this great story, no matter how you read it. You don't have to be a dramatic orator. Although if you can, that's awesome. But if you can read something interesting, then there's an association to that book. And again, a slow process, but the 1-2 punch of like, hey, show me your comic books. That's awesome. Wow, I didn't know Batman had that going on. Here's my story. And you're having kind of this interactive process. He's got a control in it. He's got a part in it. You care about where he's coming from. And all the while, however it works, it's this constant slow motion building of this is why reading is good. And occasionally you have to directly address the fact that if reading is a challenge, it's something that can be fixed. It's something that can be improved through practice, like riding a bike.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I just wish I had more time with him.
Yeah, and there's definitely that as well.
Yeah, I feel that I feel this sense of urgency, and I don't know if he feels that, but he probably doesn't. But I definitely do, and I just see him once a week.
Well, the comic books are a good way to kind of encourage reading that happens outside of the tutoring session. So, I'm not suggesting you buy things out of your pocket or anything like that, but I know comic books are accessible in libraries and stuff. If he's very interested in them, you start with very simple ones, and then maybe talk about them, and then over time, and unfortunately, it is a slow kind of process. It might be able to, evolve into graphic novels, and then maybe even get some Harry Potter in there.
No, that's great. I'll instead of looking at it as a distraction, I'll go with it.
Yeah, I would.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think you're right on, Jason. I think whatever you can do to encourage reading at any level, just looking at pictures and making up, even talking about sentences that go along or stories that go along with those pictures, or all those are just great ideas to start with your student. I see that Alicia has another question, so I'm going to go to her. Alicia, go ahead. Alicia?
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Jack, I just wanted to mention to you, with reference to your meeting, let's say it's an hour meeting, which it usually is our tutoring session, that you can take half an hour to read to him a subject that he's good at, and I was trying to figure out the name of a book that I've used, I'll try to get that answer for you, with a child of the same age, and is also a boy. And it was an easy read, but yet it enabled their imagination. I know Charlotte's Web is one of them, but there's another one too, so I'll try to get that answer to you before we're done here. And take that half an hour, and then after, and he can choose. Giving children the opportunity to make a choice about, do you want to work on your schoolwork stuff, or would you like to hear the story first? You know, if they don't want to choose, then I would say let's do the reading first, and then after that he can work. I don't know. You know him better than I do. But anyhow, I just wanted to give that. Yes, you can split that up. I know you want more time, but you can use it efficiently, you know.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have questions right now? I'm not sending hands up. Jason, do you have anything else to add?
Oh, I mean, I can talk forever, and can't begin to express how much I miss LOIN and School on Wheels and all those students, and it. I hope to find my way back soon. So I just have to say that. And I also want to say that I have my email up, if you can see it on, and you can seriously contact me at any time, talk to me at any time. It's email is a wonderful way. I'll give you my phone number as well. If I know how frustrating things can be, or you can have that one session in which you think it went really wrong or really right, and you just want to talk about it. It would be doing me a service to be able to have those conversations again. So you don't have to, but if you want to, please feel encouraged. And in speaking about the idea of like taking, that precious time and kind of devoting it to what can be seen as a distraction, that sort of speaks to a really interesting balance of how much we operate as tutors, where we're actually imparting information and working on the nitty-gritty of a schoolwork assignment and stuff like that, and how much we're actually kind of building a foundation or a plan, like working to help scaffold the student to be able to do that on their own. And so a lot of it ends up being sort of this academic mentoring, in the sense that you're just trying to encourage the things that are going to kind of flourish in a general sense. And reading is always one of those tricky ones. It's tricky and difficult to get away from the assignment for a little bit and talk about Batman, but one of the most important things that we can do, and this is my opinion, is to be constant, reliable, and unflappably supportive. So even if we're not necessarily hitting the particular assignment as much as we'd want to, we're not necessarily being as much of an academic pillar of good, we're still showing that we care, we're still showing that we're centered on academics and we're here to make that work however that happens, and we're a reliable cog in the machinery that is so often not reliable. And that over time, I've seen it, and if I remember, you said 5 sessions so far. That's just getting warmed up, and once you have 10, 15, 20, once you realize is that at the library you're still there, it's there's going to be more opportunity for him to talk about the frustration or feel open to what you're presenting, and so it starts to shift away from what seems like distractions into that core of what you want to get to, the actual book assignment or the actual grammar assignment that you've constructed. It falls into place. It's almost one leads into the other, often it seems.
Yeah, and it's one of the most difficult challenges of being a School on Wheels tutor, is that you don't know if you have 3 sessions or if you are going to have 25 or 30 sessions, and I think that you have to keep goals in mind that are short-term goals and long-term goals, and just keep working on, like every week, keep working on getting to know the student better, and just doing little things that can help in that immediately, as well as setting long-term goals. That's just my 2 cents. Jason, did you have anything more to add? I don't see that anyone else has any more questions, and I think we might conclude soon. Jason?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Oh, Catherine has her hand up. Let me just have her speak for Catherine.
Just want to say thank you very much, Jason. This was most helpful, and we really appreciate your time. Thanks for doing this. This is wonderful.
Oh, thank you very much. I was very honored and very happy to do it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason. This is very helpful, I think, to our tutors, and I'm really glad that to see so many people here. I know it's people have their lives in the evenings, but I think that it's great to have this online format so they can just kind of participate from afar and learn some things. So we'll see if we can talk to Jason about emailing the presentation, if that would be helpful. And I'm going to be sending out a little survey for you guys to fill out. But I'll give you my contact information through that survey, and if you have any other questions, just let me know, because I can always put you in touch with Jason or any other of our consultants or experts who can help you with certain issues. So thank you once again, Jason. It's great to have you. And I am counting on you returning to the area to tutor. So
I'm trying.
Okay, good. So that concludes our online workshop. Thank you again for coming, and have a good evening.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.